Just 10 days ago, we met in this chamber to address Russia's unprecedented escalation of its war of aggression against Ukrainian civilians. Since the beginning of June, the brutality of Russia's attacks on the civilian population has once again set a grim new record of casualties and destruction. During the night of June 1 and continuing into the morning hours of June 2, the Russian Federation launched one of the most extensive and devastating combined aerial attacks against Ukraine since the start of its full-scale invasion. A total of 729 aerial attack assets were deployed, including 656 unmanned aerial vehicles and 73 missiles, among them 33 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, 27 101 cruise missiles, 5 Caliber missiles, and 8 Zircon hypersonic missiles, the most deadly ones. The scale and composition of this strike indicate a deliberate attempt to overwhelm Ukraine's air defense and maximize damage across urban areas. The primary direction of the attack was the city of Kyiv again, which suffered the most severe consequences in the last years. In the capital, at least 7 people were killed and around 80 were injured, including children. Apartment buildings in multiple districts were damaged or partially destroyed, and fires broke out across the city. Critical civilian infrastructure, including medical facilities, were affected, leaving parts of the city without electricity. In Dnipro, one of the hardest hit cities, at least 17 people were killed, including children and an emergency responder. More than 40 people were injured. A multi-story residential building was partially destroyed, with civilians trapped under the rubble during rescue operations. Extensive damage was recorded to residential buildings, civilian infrastructure, and public facilities. In Kharkiv, as well as in other regions, including Poltava, Sumy, Zaporizhia, and Chernihiv, Russian strikes caused severe injuries to civilians, damage to residential buildings, and disruption to infrastructure. Across Ukraine, during this latest heinous attack, more than 20 people were killed and over 120 were severely injured, including many children. Homes, hospitals, schools, warehouses, and energy infrastructure were damaged or destroyed, worsening the widespread impact on civilian life. Russian terror against civilians is ongoing and relentless. On June 3rd, nearly 200 drones attacked Ukraine. Next day, June 4, another barrage of almost 300 drones. And on June 5 and 6, again, more than 200 drones were launched each single day. Even while we are meeting here today, innocent people in Ukraine are paying with their lives. Just as this meeting got underway, a brutal Russian drone strike on the city of Zaporizhia killed 2 civilians at a bus stop, and 24 persons were injured. No diplomatic language can adequately describe the cruelty of such criminal acts. No military necessity can ever justify this barbarism. Madam President, let me now turn to the attention of this Council to the recent report of the Secretary General that has blacklisted Russia's armed and security forces as credibly suspected of committing rape and other forms of conflict-related sexual violence. What a shame. What a shame for this inglorious Russian army and the so-called law enforcement agency that are nothing else but a gang of rapists. Any ancient horde of barbarians was more human than today's Russian troops. For Ukrainians, these crimes, these outrageous crimes, are not new. They have been systematically documented since Russia's occupation of Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk in 2014. What has fundamentally changed now is that these appalling facts have now been independently verified and officially recorded by the United Nations. Let me quote from this report to give the Council a feeling of a country with which you must share this table. The Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine verified 310 cases of conflict-related sexual violence, including rape, gang rape, genital mutilation, electric shocks, and beatings to the genitals, affecting 280 men, 26 women, and 4 girls, perpetrated by Russian armed and security forces, including the Federal Penitentiary Service, the Russian armed forces, and the Federal Security Service." End quote. Madam President, the official response of Mr. Nebenza to this independently verified deplorable evidence, which shocks human conscience, followed the same shameless pattern as in the fake story of Starobilsk. Deny everything, distort the facts, attack the messenger, openly discredit Secretary General, and undermine a monitoring mission and system that was established by this very council. In a press conference a few days ago, Mr. Nebenza found this report biased. He found it poorly structured and formalistic, to use his own words. He asserted that the report failed to demonstrate the systemic nature of the alleged violations. Well, the Russian representative seems to be a demanding literary critic, though a rather selective one, given that Russia's government openly refused to cooperate with Special Representative Pramila Patten and denied access. Let me quote again from the SG report. One of 310 cases documented, 232 cases, or 74%, involved multiple forms of sexual violence, while 195 cases, 62%, involved multiple incidents of sexual violence, which was often used to punish or humiliate, to extract confessions, prisoners of war, and civilian detainees. A male prisoner of war was raped with a knife by Russian armed forces upon capture in 2022 and subsequently subjected to repeated sexual violence, including force, nudity, beatings, and electric shocks to the genitals, end quote. Mr. Nebenza is not here, even though he promised that he would sit when a Ukrainian representative is speaking, but he will follow up. Mr. Nebenza, at what percentage shall the pattern of war crimes related to sexual violence become systematic, according to Russia's very high standards of torturing innocent people? Dear members of the Council, how long are we going to tolerate these unacceptable attacks on Russia, on the legitimacy of the Secretary General, and as well as his special representative on the sexual violence and the crimes connected with the sexual violence? How long are we going to tolerate this story? May I make a creative suggestion? If Russia feels uncomfortable with all the decisions of the General Assembly demanding unconditional withdrawal of its troops, or better to say, its war criminals from the Ukrainian soil, if Russia rejects independent reports of relevant UN bodies exposing Moscow's barbaric policies, maybe it is time to say goodbye and get out of the UN. As we all know, the Russian Federation was never properly admitted to the UN. So I do not think that anyone in this chamber will be shedding tears when Russia finally slams the door and leaves. Every single day, the Russian representative is spitting in all our faces with his constant lies, while we too politely pretend that it is just falling rain. Madam President, let me remind the Council that Russia's armed forces have already been listed 3 consecutive times in the Secretary General report on children and armed conflict. Now Russia is listed under both flagship Security Council resolution, CAC, and conflict-related sexual violence. This designation cannot remain just a symbolic exercise. A military force that has been blacklisted by the Secretary General for conflict-related sexual violence cannot and shall not be a contributor to any operations under the UN flag. Russia's personnel shall be banned from UN peacekeeping and police missions. Madam President, while Russia fabricates baseless accusations on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, it continues to endanger nuclear safety in reality. As we just heard, today, on the night of June 6, a Russian drone struck a building at Ukraine's centralized spent fuel storage facility in Kyiv region, located within the Chernobyl area. That facility is used for the long-term storage of spent fuel from Ukrainian nuclear power plants. The strike caused a fire, which was extinguished by our emergency services. That was an attack on critically important nuclear infrastructure. Let us be clear, that was not incidental. That was deliberate and extremely dangerous act. And although radiation levels remain, thanks God, within normal limits, the incident demonstrates a further escalation in Russia's reckless behavior, which has long crossed all acceptable boundaries. Madam President, Ukraine has repeatedly demonstrated its commitment to peace. On June 4, the President of Ukraine addressed an open letter to Mr. Putin signaling the need to end this war and expressing readiness for direct negotiations. Ukraine has proposed a concrete path forward, a meeting of the two leaders on neutral territory. What we heard in response from Mr. Putin was "niet," again and again, "niet." Rather than showing readiness to start direct talks to end the senseless war, the Russian president declared during St. Petersburg Economic Forum that Russia was thriving and its economy was flourishing stronger than ever. Ironically, Mr. Putin did so against the backdrop of black smoke billowing from critically military facilities near St. Petersburg that had been struck by Ukrainian armed forces just hours before. The symbolism was hard to miss. We should better listen to the whining of Russian officials, the same people who for years lectured everyone about the supposedly unmatched resilience of Russia's economy and mocked sanctions as ineffective. Now, these very same figures are openly sounding the alarm and nervously looking for an off-ramp before the situation deteriorates even further. Russia's Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, recently admitted that the country is facing a difficult situation, while Finance Minister Anton Siluanov warned about growing risks of budget deficit. Russian MP Renat Suleimanov openly acknowledged that the Russian economy may not withstand a prolonged war against Ukraine. Analysts agree that Russia's economy is approaching a point of structural stagnation. After years of wartime overheating, growth forecasts have now fallen towards roughly 1%. Inflation remains around 15% despite interest rate being pushed to nearly 20%. Reserve funds are being rapidly depleted. Budget deficit in the first quarter of 2026 alone exceeded $50 billion, overcoming the official target for the entire year. Oil and gas revenues, the backbone of the Russian budget, declined by roughly 40% in the first months of this year. For the last years, Russia sustained itself through its deathonomics, economic model that relied on war, militarization, and death itself as key drivers of economic activity. The Kremlin is now spending roughly $10 billion annually on military recruitment bonuses alone, while monthly compensation for deaths in combat can reach approximately $200,000 per soldier. Dying at the front has effectively become more financially rewarding than a lifetime of civilian work. But even this vile, distorted model is showing signs of exhaustion. Recruitment costs are rapidly increasing, inflation and labor shortages are worsening, civilian sectors continue to stagnate, and ever larger parts of the economy are being consumed by war. So in reality, Russia's economic situation is approaching a critical point despite the fact that its leadership continues to project forced optimism. On the battlefield, Ukraine could liberate in May 100 square kilometers more than Russian troops were able to advance for the second month in a row. Madam President, I would like to reiterate first the point that I made at our last meeting. Ukraine calls on our partner to scale up their support, particularly in the field of air defense, at least tenfold, better 20-fold. The most effective way to protect innocent lives today is to ensure that Ukraine has sufficient capabilities to intercept missiles and drones that Russia launches against our cities. Today, not tomorrow, not next month, not next year. Second, we urge all members of the United Nations to move beyond fragmented measures and adopt truly coordinated, comprehensive sanctions against Russia's war machinery. The target is clear: Russia's military-industrial complex, which continues to manufacture missiles, drones, and other weapons used to terrorize Ukrainian citizens on a daily basis. Every remaining channel through which critical technologies and components continue to reach Russia must be shut down. And third, I once again appeal to the members of the Security Council to place on the table, without further delay, a draft resolution calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, as well as the release and exchange of all prisoners of war and all civilian detainees under the all-for-all formula. Such a step could serve as an essential confidence-building measure and would contribute to establishing a more conducive environment for launching genuine negotiations in the near future aimed at achieving a comprehensive, just and lasting peace. Madam President, to conclude, I want to address the Russian representative with words from a famous Soviet cartoon which perfectly capture the current mood in Russian population that increasingly faces dire consequences of the boomerang of this barbarian war. Эх, жизнь моя жестянка, да ну ее в болото. All my life is so miserable. Let me throw it into the swamp. I thank you.